Okay, so we'll move over to a Q&A session for all three of our case study speakers. So if Hannah and Barney can come back on, thank you. So first of all, I've got a question for both Hannah and Barney. How would your systems cope without glyphosate?
Do you want me to go first, Nicola?
Yes, that's fine.
It would be incredibly difficult. I think it has to be appreciated that glyphosate can be quite keen to integrated pest management, integrated weed management. And without glyphosate, the thought of going back to ploughing fills me with dread, because I know that our profitability of our farm would decline and our weed burden would go up. So realistically, I think Barney kind of mentioned it at the end of his speech, looking at things like electric weeders, AI and robotics. I think that potentially could be an answer. But certainly in the last few years, our use of glyphosate has actually gone down, especially by using kind of cover crops and doing things like disrupting them. We're very lucky, we're below sea level. Well, I say we're lucky. We're below sea level here at the Fen. So we get some really harsh frosts. And last week we went and rolled one of our cover crops in the frost, which broke the stems, and therefore that desiccated the cover crop. There will be black grass underneath, will need to be killed with glyphosate at a later date, but we will be using less than we would have done normally. So it's a very difficult question, to be honest.
Yeah, I would agree. I think it's tricky. It's something we're very conscious of, and sort of looking within sort of Groundswell to really look at what other people are doing and sort of set up our own trials. I agree, you know, there's things with the crimper rollers that you could use, but they add massive complications in terms of what cover crops you use and how it works, to do with flowering timing and when you actually crimper it, and then species selection. And then that affects your drilling timing. You know, it's massively sort of probably not really understood in terms of, because we haven't had to do it. So it's really trying to push that sort of trial work at a farm level through. So we are trying some of that. And again, our main issue, probably where we're most concerned, is for the grass side and taking out those herbal lays and things after cattle, because we're so reliant. That would mean going back to quite heavy cultivation to kill that grass off.
Yeah. Okay, so we've got another question for Barney here. I'll go back to your presentation. What depth of soil was the organic matter samples taken from? And this second part might be more difficult because you're fairly recent, but do you know, was it taken to the same depth as in 2010, the original samples?
I believe it was, but I'm not 100% sure without going and asking someone about the 2010. I think all the samples were done ourselves, and I think they were done to 15 centimetres. I am in the process of adding a little bit more science in that, in terms of GPS locations, doing a bit more baseline and looking at how we are sampling. But I'm working with someone else's data. Right,
yes, yeah, of course. And the impact of the system that you're using at Groundswell now, do you know what the difference between the gross margin is versus the previous system?
That's a tricky one to answer, really. I think it's quite, when you start out with no-till, they went sort of cold turkey at it, and it was literally 1 year went sort of full no-till. I think if you had a bit of a slower approaching, you would have less effect. But I think there was a few sort of painful years to start with as you sort of rework the system. You know, when you do have problems with potentially with compaction and no structure, you know, it takes time to build all that and the biology and to get it all working. I would say it's probably getting more comparable now, because we've reduced costs so much and the inputs have gone down, the yield's actually going up. And it can be variable, and it's probably a slightly higher risk. You know, some of them, like this year, we're relying on biology to convert nitrogen in the soil for the crop. More than we probably are. You know, we probably had to put more fertilizer on this year because of the dry weather, because the soil biology just stops working when it gets so dry and hot. So it probably is slightly riskier, but I would say it's Groundswell actually run a benchmarking across a group of no-till farmers who are running the same sort of systems. And the indications there is that they do stack up and you can actually make more money. Yeah, it's not necessarily, it's looking at margin, not yield, as people keep saying.
Okay. There's been some interest in how you control weeds where you're sort of bi-cropping and where you've got companion crops in.
So start with companion crops. So certainly with our rape and that, we select species for the companions that will die over winter as long as we get a frost, which unluckily we're a bit higher than you, Hannah. Yeah, so hopefully things like sunflowers, mustards, buckwheat all die off over winter. And then we actually want to keep the clover and the vetch through till harvest anyway, and the fact that we actually try and combine that, split it out, and then use that in our covers to cheapen the cost through home safe seed.
Which of the cover crops are the most persistent?
That's a tricky, in terms of persistent, in terms of after drilling, or is in a problem as in turn into a weed, or as in?
Yeah, so which ones would be harder to get rid of?
To be honest, it's probably, if you include grass or cereals in a cover crop, they're probably some of the harder ones, depending on what you're using if you want to try and reduce your glyphosate rate. And things like radish, if they're put in early, they can go to seed and can set viable seed, and then a bigger plant to try and take out. So it's managing what you're putting in at what time. And a lot of it's sort of what works on your farm with sort of your sort of climate.
Can I just come in on that one, Nicola?
Yes, certainly.
I think that we have had experience of using crops, you know, like we normally go in our rotations. So we used to grow quite a lot of barley and oats as well. And so we planted some tame oats one year, and they didn't come in the winter. They came in the following spring, and then we had a oat problem. So you've just got to be very careful. So like kind of Barney was saying, now we only use things that probably don't appear so much in our cash crop. So we've got species that are completely different. We don't use so many cereals, and certainly won't go anywhere near barley.
And Hannah, your initial problem weeds, how are they now? Have they sort of like largely disappeared, or
so
different spectrum?
Blackgrass is still here, definitely. There are still problem patches, but they are known and they are managed, I would say. And we make careful consideration to what we do to that field. So either drilling later, drilling in the spring, doing things differently. Broadleaf weeds will always still be here. We will still need herbicides, but I feel like we have a lot more tools and they are a lot more manageable than they once were. If we can grow competitive crops, we have a chance. If the weeds get above our crops, we have no chance. And that's why things such as intercropping and that kind of thing, trying to just starve any other weeds of light, I think has got quite good potential for us on our fertile soil.
And have you seen an increase in any other weed species that you didn't have there initially?
I think, like Barney, brome potentially could be a problem, but not really yet. We're just keeping our eyes out, and just again, what Barney said is this whole system really does take a lot more attention to detail and management time. And as soon as we see something, we'll be marking it and thinking how we can manage that problem.
Mm-hmm. And would you consider using alternative new technology, weed control options, if they became available to arable systems, such as electrical weed-ins, spot treatment, patch spraying, etc.?
We will try anything. Yeah, I think it's quite funny, really. Yeah, we have multiple trials on the farm, anytime, because I think like we have loads of fungicide trials. We would have herbicide trials if there were things that we wanted to compare, but mainly it's integrated pest management things that we try out. And if there's something new coming along, we'll just try a 24-meter strip in the field and see how it compares to what we're using conventionally. And I am really quite interested in electronic weeders and AI, because I think that's probably got some potential, but also a lot of challenges as well.
And as farmers, what are your insights into how we can increase IPM uptake by end users?
Well, I think Joe and the AHDB are brilliant. Personally, I use them a lot as a resource. And I think that they're a great link from the researchers to farmers and growers. And that's really key for me. I mean, we personally have an independent agronomist. That's kind of going back to what Henry was speaking about earlier. And I think that's quite important from a personal perspective. He seems to bring a more wider and rounded range of kind of opinions to us on the farm. Discussion groups also really good, especially when we're kind of getting that science. I think when people really understand the science behind something and that it actually really practically works, you get that adoption rather than more the kind of hearsay, which is maybe again what Henry was speaking about at the beginning of today. But I guess with elms coming forward and the change in, you know, payments and stuff, that might well push farmers to
the boost that we need.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've got some questions that have come in for Joe as well, so not to leave you out. So see, this sort of work is really important internationally. Are AHDB going to share this information with other countries?
Yeah, so literally today, which I jumped in later, we liaise with the commodity expert groups in Europe, and we regularly share our data with them. And it also means that we can generate residue data across Europe, which has a massive cost saving for us, as obviously different countries will pick up certain costs. So yeah, and we also we link in with a group in the US as well, where we share data too.
Okay, that's really good.
Yeah.
So are trials being carried out on other IPM control methods, not just work to generate emus?
Yeah, so the EMU team, we're part of a larger team called Crop Health and IPM at AHDB, and there are plans in place headed by our new team leader, Don Pendergrass, that started this week, where we are looking at IPM as a key focus, and very much the sort of prevent, detect, control mantra is being sort of pushed forward. And there's a lot of interaction with different groups and NFU, etc., to try and move that forward for the future.
How long does it take to go from a coded product to getting an EMU?
That's a very good question. It can be as quick as 6 months if the data's all there and the application gets through CRD quickly, or it could be several years. If we do need to generate several years worth of data, or we may be waiting on manufacturers to support us with things such as metabolism data, then it can take longer. So it's an ongoing process, and it's something that we do and liaise with the manufacturers every 6 months to try and progress those applications as fast as we can.
Okay, thank you. So I've got one here. So huge sums of money are spent on scientific evidence to show that herbicides are effective and safe, and then further sums are spent on emus. Are similar scientific trials being done to show that other IPM methods are safe and effective? So that's for you, Joe.
There's a lot of money spent on sort of research, whether it be through BBSRC, Innovate UK, which are all sort of looking far more at that IPM approach. And certainly within AHDB, we find a number of the projects over the years, particularly the ones that I can think of have been in tree fruit and soft fruit, where they've been looking at IPM approaches. So yeah.
Okay. And I know you sort of just touched on the AMBER project today, but are there any promising biopesticides that are looking to come out of this project?
So the AMBER project was looking at products already approved and just trying to get growers more confident. In terms of Scepter Plus, then yeah, there's quite a number of bioprotectants there that we're seeing as being useful and that we're moving forward with. So yeah.
Okay, so I've got this one that's for Hannah and Barney. So which sticks and carrots are best for them to adopt IPM approaches?
I guess I'll go first then. Well, it's a really difficult question. I mean, for me, I came back to the farm, and unfortunately, it felt a little bit like we were being ruled by blackgrass. And so there wasn't any other alternative but to try and change the system. And so for me, I just knew that things had to change. So it wasn't really a case of a stick or a carrot. It was going out there and seeing what the research suggested, what other integrated pest management strategies would help us, because our herbicides just weren't going to do the job anymore. And I think we've touched slightly on elms before, but as things are changing with our direct payments, people, if we've got a problem, you've got to kind of get out there and find the solution to that problem. So sticks and carrots will help, but at the same time, people have really got to look at their own business viability. I think that's probably the key.
Yeah, I would agree with Hannah. I think, personally, I don't really like the stick analogy, really, but I think it's gonna come down to that bit in terms of legislation and elms and going forward. I think there is more of a push with carbon and climate change and the way we're currently doing things and the pressure from the public. So, and I think I think people are going to start looking for their own answers, as Hannah says, in terms of the problems they have. And I think places like Groundswell, or being a member of, say, Base UK, or some of the others where you can, talk to other people who are doing it on that sort of farm level and really, see results and sort of, you learn from failures as much as you do from successes. So, I think stick and carrot, I think it's a bit simplistic really for a lot of IPM.
Yeah, I didn't say earlier, but I completely agree with Barney. Groundswell is fantastic. I just wanted to give you a big up because I've learned loads through going to Groundswell. I was gutted that it didn't happen this year, but basically there are so many avenues out there for farmers to learn about IPM from other farmers as well. There's not really any excuse, I don't think, but that's just me personally.
And Joe, does it look like there's any bioherbicides that are going to be coming through that will be available? I think you're on mute, Joe.
Sorry. Yeah, bioherbicides is a tricky one. We see biopesticides for disease control and insect control, but we're not specifically seeing much at the moment for herbicides. We are aware of some work that's being done for Himalayan balsam control, which I think Cabby were leading on. But yeah, it's a lot more tricky, I think, bioherbicides than it would be for some of the other products.
Yeah,
and
that seem to be harder.
Yeah, I mean, you do hear of some that are coming maybe into the States, perhaps, but yeah, I think they're a bit far off. For me, I think precision and that approach is probably going to be one of the key things moving forward. And I think that sort of, whether it also electric weeding or the laser or that sort of technology, we see that starting to come a little bit further forward.
Okay, that's great.